Welcome to MJ Hobby Corner. This is an MJ Games Spotlight, and this is a little video series that I've come up with, and it's my official little series for reviewing game rules. I simply pick a rule set from my game library and go over it. This is not an in-depth analysis of the rules or anything like that. It is a brief overview, but I do talk a little bit about the game mechanics, any terrain that I use, and many times I try to provide a little example of a game turn, just so people can get an idea what the game's about. So today we're going to talk about Fantastic Battles by Irregular Wars, Nick Wright. And this is a fairly recent game, 2020, 2021. Okay, so I'm showing clips of the pages of the book just to have something in the background and to give an idea of how nice the book is. Basically, your introductory page gives you information about the book. It gives you some central tenets that the author has used for these rules. So, for example, this is a setting agnostic game, which I love. It is miniature agnostic, so you use whatever you have in your collection. Okay. And also scale agnostic, and that's also important, and that refers to the bases of the miniatures as well, and you can use miniatures in any scale. So it's cool that the author mentions that right off the bat in the introduction. There is also no figure removal in this mechanic. When figures die, basically casualties remain on the tray. Once the resolve of the unit goes down to 0, and that's a stat, we'll look at that in a minute. Once that goes down to 0, the unit has lost its will to fight and is simply removed from the table. So the resolve acts almost as a hit point system for the units. All right, so let's continue. All right, so building an army is a very important part of the book, and here you get all your rules for building an army. One of the very cool things about an army building in this game is the idea of companies versus groups versus units, okay? You also have characters and fantastical beasts that you can add to your armies in order to provide that really cool fantasy element that we all seek in fantasy games. So basically, all armies can be custom built, and they can be built to suit your vision of a fantasy race, whether it's dwarves, elves, orcs, whatever it is. So there is some customization to the profiles that the game provides, and that is excellent in my opinion. So let's look at some of the stats in the company profiles. Okay, the first one is resolve, and resolve is very important. As I mentioned earlier, resolve acts almost like a hit point system, except it's not. It kind of represents the unit's will to fight, or company's will to fight. And once that is reduced to 0, as when a unit takes damage, then the entire company just runs away, or is removed from the table. So it represents both casualties and the unit's resolve, the unit's will to fight, and that's very interesting. The second is movement, and that's very important. Movement is, in this case, how many base lengths you have. Okay, and that's very interesting. The way they did, the way this author organized the distances in the game is very interesting. It is base lengths. Not the base length of individual miniatures, but whatever tray or base that you have all your miniatures on. So it's the actual company base that it takes into account. So movement of 2 would be 2 base lengths. So if your base length was, I don't know, say 4 inches long, then your unit's going to move 8 inches. So that's interesting to me. The next thing is melee, and of course this is an important stat, and melee represents how many dice your company will use when attacking in melee. Melee rolls are done against your opponent's defense, okay? And that is a number usually with a little plus sign, okay? So that means you need to hit 5s or over on 3 dice for a formed company, okay? So that is how melee works. Now, shooting is a little different. I'll go over it in just a minute, but it basically has 2 numbers, and usually if it has a range capability, you'll have 1 number in front for short range, and you have the second number, which is for long range. And again, these numbers represent base lengths, not the base length of individual miniatures, but the entire base, say a tray, a regiment tray, or something like that. So it works in the end. Company profiles dictate how the unit is going to behave, or how the company is going to behave during the game. So the core mechanic to forming armies is the group, unit, and company designations. Companies are 2 companies will make 1 unit, and you can have a group which is up to 4 companies. All right, and you can have 1 group or 2 groups, depending on your army. And of course, groups are slower because they're larger. So to form a group, you must have identical profiles in those individual companies in order to, so that they can be grouped together. So this is what really defines your army in the game, you know, how your army is going to function and all that. And there are rules and additional traits for groups. Spells are a very important part of any good fantasy game, and magic users are interesting in this game. They have a level that will determine how many spells they can get. So for example, magic users will have 3 spells. So if those spells are level 1, they can have the 3 spells. But if it's a level 3 spell, they can specialize and just have that 1 stronger spell. So you can have a magic user with 3 lesser difficulty spells, or 1 that specializes, you know, on 1 powerful spell. And there are about 10 spells in the list, and all very cool spells like Confusion, Blink, Magic Missile, Entangle. Those are just some of the spells. Each spell has its own rules on how it works, and there is a difficulty number, either a 3+, a 4+, usually 3+, a 4+, and some of them have, like one of them has a not applicable number difficulty. Okay, so those have different rules for casting. And basically all it is, if you are a first level wizard, then you use a 1d6 and you roll over the number, the difficulty number of the spell. If it's a 4+, then you have to roll a 4+ in order for the spell to go off, and you just follow the instructions of the spell. So not a complicated magic system. A very important thing I want to mention is that magic users can be mage lords. That is, they can lead your army. A mage lord is the only character able to rally figures with the mindless trait. So therefore you can have a necromancer who can then rally skellies if you make him your mage lord or your leader. The other leader available to your army is the warlord, and that is a character figure as well. There are rules for these character figures in the book. So you will have either a warlord or a mage lord leading your army. And magic users, you have 1 magic user per 500 points of figures in your army. That is the rule. So the pre-game procedure section of the book gives you different ways to deploy your armies before the game, which is very good. It's not just a traditional A on one side and B opposite. There are different ways to deploy. Your terrain categories have 9 different categories, which tell you what terrain is going to do, what kind of terrain it is. So if it's linear or hills or open, and each of these have little notes on rules on how to handle it. So that tells me that the game does utilize terrain a lot for the battles, and that's great. That's really opens up strategy. So let's see what else. We have 9 different terrain things. We also have optional rules with objectives and strategies. So there are tables in this section which give you some more optional rules, and that's always good to add some flavor. There is also a section that's very important, and it's called the mishaps section. And this is something you're going to do before you actually play the game. You roll for each of your units, and there's a little table there that tells you what happens with that unit. There's a little mishap that affects the unit. So for example, one of those mishaps could be disease. So the unit has been badly affected by sickness, okay? And basically it has -1 resolve per company in the unit. Remember, a unit is 2 companies. So if you're rolling for the unit, a mishap for the unit, then each of those companies is going to have that mishap. All right, that's really bad. And if you have a group, then each of the little companies in that group, which is 4 for a group, is going to have that mishap. So that just adds a little more flavor. I've never seen a mechanic like this in a game. And that's just my experience. But it is interesting to have that little mishap ability in the core mechanics. Is very interesting, and you do that before you actually start your game. Okay, so that means that the laid plans of your leaders can be foiled by mishaps. Okay, and this is done at the opening stages of a battle. Okay, and basically goes on through the game. You only roll once for this. Okay, so I'm not going in full order here, but I want to say something about melee, because combat is obviously a war game's meat and potatoes. So the melee, the actual act of melee in this game is not complicated at all. You will be rolling a number of attack dice depending on your company's profile. When those companies come in base-to-base contact, the melee sequence begins. And basically you will take note of your opponent's defense for their company, and you have to roll equal to or over your opponent's defense in order to score a hit. There are several modifiers, as you can see by the little table, and you add those modifiers in the form of dice, extra dice, or other kinds of modifiers that may affect the melee. The opponent then loses resolve as a result of any successful hits, and resolve damage is what basically affects your opponent's companies. Okay, once your resolve goes down to 0, then that company is out of the picture. Now, there are also rules, and I'm not going to go over all the melee rules. There are a number of nice art diagrams and things to help you understand how melee works. There is a difference in companies and groups, between companies and groups. Groups are much larger, of course, can be larger. It can be 2 companies forming a group, 3 companies, and up to 4 companies. So you can have a pretty large group. So in groups, only the companies that are in base-to-base contact with each other will actually participate in the melee. So this way, if 2 large groups meet, then they're basically going to whittle themselves down. So in group combats, it is possible those companies that are not directly involved in the melee do provide a support bonus that is +1 attack dice to the melee phase, as they're supporting the sort of the companies in front of them. Okay, so there is while not all of them fight, there is a benefit to having the companies arranged in a group. Okay, groups are just large formations. They're very low maneuverability, but you add their resolve together, and so they have a lot of resolve. So they basically last longer. They're just very hard to maneuver around terrain because they're larger. They are composed of more companies. And the larger your group, if you have a 4-company group, the more unwieldy it is, okay? But the longer it lasts. Okay, so all I want to say about this is part of the shooting section of the book, and basically the ranged attacks, and it gives you little diagrams for little example diagrams, and that's one of the things I really love about this book. The diagrams are excellent. There are diagrams for action, for the action phase, how different troops will move, how different troop formations will move, because you do have different types of troop formations. You can have columns, troops arranged in columns. You can have them arranged in the traditional rank and file bricks, right? But there's even a tortoise formation. All of these formations behave slightly differently, and you arrange them during your deployment phase. So the diagrams provide you with a lot of good examples, and as they say, pictures are worth, 1,000 words, right? So basically, a lot of times I will read the stuff, and then when I look at the diagram, I'm saying, oh yeah, okay, that's what they mean. So really good thing. The author gets a lot of kudos for this. Very, very good diagrams explaining the concepts, and that's very, very important. So all I want to say about ranged weapons, here is a profile. You have men-at-arms, the formed company, which is a formed company, and then you have mounted scouts, which is an irregular company. If you look at the numbers, the men-at-arms have no ranged capability. There's no numbers there. And down below, you have the irregular company has a 2, followed by a slash, and then no number. So meaning what this is that the first number is a short range, right? And so this company uses 2 dice. These numbers represent the numbers of dice that you're going to use to make the ranged attack. So it has 2 dice at short range. Range is determined by base widths in this game. Okay, and a base width is basically your regiment tray. It's going to be the width of that tray, not the length. I said that wrong earlier. It's supposed to be the base width. So whatever your tray is, the width, and that's what you use to determine your range. So 2 base widths, that's short range. 5 base widths is long range. And artillery pieces have their own sort of profiles, and they usually go 10 base widths, okay? But in this case, the irregular company of mounted scouts can shoot 2 base widths, all right? And it uses 2 dice for that short range weapon. And basically, you use your opponent's defense to determine what it is you need to hit on each of those dice. And there are modifiers to all of this. So the book then describes the action phase. And in the action phase, you have a whole series of optional actions that companies can take. And it lists those actions. You also have what's called an impetuous action. If a company is out of command range of one of the leaders, then an impetuous action takes place, and there's a little table for that, and they're very, very interesting. Okay, they also have a little bit of a narrative flavor to them, so it's cool. But one of the things that I find very refreshing about this rule set is the formations, and these are group formations, not company formations. These group formations can involve column, They can involve other kinds of formations, the tortoise formation. This is very refreshing. Normally we play with, rank and file brick formations, but the truth of the matter is that ancient armies did have different formations in reality. So it's nice that it's incorporated in this game. And of course, this game can be played as a historical war game. It doesn't have to be played as a fantasy war game. So that's also very interesting. So also notice the way that the diagrams depict the different formations. Again, diagrams are very good in this book and really do help to kind of explain the concepts a little bit. So very nice. Okay, and then we get towards the end of the book. We have the army lists, and it gives you good examples for many different fantasy armies. You have about 12 different fantasy armies to get you playing right away, right? And you can customize these. You can add additional traits, etc. These can be customized, but it's a very nice thing whenever a book adds or gives you a lot of examples of armies. So this way, once you're familiar with the game, you can then do your entire army list from scratch. But basically, this gives you a very good starting point. And these are the wild elves. I love that they don't call them wood elves. They're just wild elves with a Y. And then the book also has many examples for historical armies. Again, you can play historical armies, which who knows, maybe one day I will play. I am interested in ancient history. So you remove the magic system and you have yourself a nice historical war game. Okay, so very cool. And last but not least is the game reference sheets. There is 2 pages of these, 1 page and then half of another page, not very many. All the tables that you're going to need in the game kind of at your fingertips. I always love when games do this. It helps a lot, okay? So, and that's it. That's basically the whole rule book. In conclusion, companies are the building block of your army. Companies can be arranged into groups. Groups can have 2 companies, 3 companies, or 4 companies. They are larger, more resilient, but also very hard to maneuver on the table. And companies may also have their own individual traits, which gives them the flavor. There is also a special trait called a racial trope, which can be given to particular companies. For example, goblins could have the unreliable racial trope. Dwarves can have the doughty racial trope, and there are tables explaining what each of these tropes do. So you have a lot of different ways of giving flavors to your companies so that they're all different, okay? So a goblin army, one goblin army may be a little different from a second goblin army. So that is very, very cool. The magic system is not complicated. The melee system is not complicated. This game uses a very interesting way of determining ranges and movement using base width, and that is the base width of the entire unit, of the entire company, and not just an individual model base width, okay? So a very, very interesting game. We will be playing this game, Julie and I will have another video with an example of army formation and also playing our first couple of turns sort of as an example, okay? This video, this just covers the rules, this spotlight, and I will have another video linked to this to give you a better idea of the game. This game does have web support, what I call web support. There is a Facebook page where you can join and get questions answered. On the tabletop, some of my favorite online gaming people formerly known as Beast of War. They have a whole week dedicated to this game, and they have a lot of videos explaining the game. They also have a battle report, and so go check them out. They definitely have a lot of good material on this game if you want to know more. We will have our own little battle reports and things on this game as soon as I can get Julie to learn it. And I may even do a couple of solo games, okay? So definitely a lot of information out there for this game, including blogs and things like that. So I'm going to put the link to on the tabletop in the description of this video. All right, folks, thank you very much, and support the channel by simply subscribing and liking. You can also visit our Patreon page. I do have a Patreon page, and I'm going to be modifying it soon, just a little bit. But we have a couple of tiers there, so do check it out if you really want to support the channel and help us out. All right, thank you, folks. This has been an MJ Gaming Spotlight. Hope you like it. Happy gaming, and I will see you guys very, very soon.